In the autumn of 1683, all of Europe held its breath. Outside the walls of Vienna, around 150,000 Ottoman soldiers stood ready, artillery roaring, crescent flags fluttering in the wind. Inside the city, around 11,000 defenders clung to hope, surrounded, starving, and outnumbered. The gateway to Europe was under siege. If Vienna fell, so too might Christendom. This was no ordinary battle. It was an apocalyptic clash of civilizations, faiths, and empires. On one side, the mighty Ottoman Empire, still expanding. On the other, the Holy Roman Empire, fractured and uncertain. At stake, the future of Europe. And then, from the misty woods of the Vienna hills, came salvation on horseback. This is the story of how the Ottomans nearly changed world history, and how a coalition of unlikely heroes stopped them at the gates. The day Europe nearly fell, and the dawn that followed. Let's step into one of the greatest sieges history almost forgot. The Empire at the Gates. Why Vienna? The Ottoman Empire in the 17th century was a beast unlike any other. Spanning from North Africa to the Persian Gulf, from the Balkans to the Black Sea, it was home to over 30 million people. Istanbul, formerly Constantinople, was its glittering capital, and its power seemed endless. For centuries, the Ottomans had been expanding westward into Europe, and Vienna stood as the last great bastion before the heart of the continent. But why Vienna? It wasn't just geography. Vienna sat like a hinge between the East and the West, between the Christian kingdoms of Europe and the Islamic Empire of the Ottomans. It was the capital of the Habsburg monarchy and the heart of the Holy Roman Empire. Its location made it a critical supply and trade route, a linchpin in European defense. The Ottomans had tried this before. In 1529, under Sultan Suleiman the Magnificent, they laid siege to Vienna for the first time. But poor weather, bad timing, and stiff resistance drove them back. Still, that attempt made one thing clear. Vienna was the prize, and it remained unfinished business. Fast forward to 1682. Sultan Mehmed IV ruled the Ottoman Empire, but real power rested with Kara Mustafa Pasha, the Grand Vizier, a man known for his ambition, charisma, and unshakable confidence. Kara Mustafa believed that Europe was divided and weak. He saw the Protestant-Catholic schism, the slow decay of the Holy Roman Empire, and the political squabbles of Christian kings as an opportunity. And he was right, at least partly. When the Ottomans declared war on the Habsburgs in 1682, Europe barely stirred. The Ottomans massed troops in Hungary, already under Ottoman control, and by the summer of 1683, Kara Mustafa led a colossal army, some estimate between 120,000 and 150,000 soldiers, toward Vienna. This army wasn't just Turkish. It included Tatars from the Crimea, Janissaries, elite Ottoman infantry, and auxiliary forces from throughout the empire. They moved like a juggernaut, burning villages, enslaving townspeople, and pushing the front line westward. Vienna's defenses were woefully underprepared. The Habsburg Emperor, Leopold I, fled the city with his court. A skeleton force of about 11,000 soldiers, mostly civilians and militia, was left behind under the command of Count Ernst Rudiger von Starhemberg. Starhemberg was young, resolute, and knew exactly what he was up against. On July 14, 1683, the Ottoman army arrived at the gates of Vienna, and the siege began. Siege and struggle, inside the walls. Imagine being inside Vienna in the summer of 1683. The sky is gray with cannon smoke. The air stinks of gunpowder, sewage, and the sweat of men who haven't bathed in weeks. You hear prayers, crying children, and the never-ending sound of digging, because the Ottomans weren't just pounding the walls, they were trying to tunnel under them. Kara Mustafa's strategy was classic: dig, blast, overwhelm. He brought with him engineers and miners trained in siege warfare. They tunneled beneath Vienna's bastions, packing the tunnels with gunpowder, and set off massive explosions to create breaches in the walls. This tactic, called sapping, was deadly. Every few days, defenders would hear a low rumble and then feel the ground shake beneath their feet as sections of the walls crumbled. But the Viennese didn't give in. Count Starhemberg organized countermines. His men dug their own tunnels to intercept and destroy Ottoman sappers. They fought underground with axes, fire, and even explosives. Above ground, every breach was patched, every hole manned. Women helped carry water and ammunition. Priests administered last rites and lifted spirits. Morale held. Still, the numbers were grim. Disease spread fast. Food grew scarce. Horses were butchered for meat. Water was rationed, but despite being outnumbered, the Viennese defenders endured. Kara Mustafa, for all his brilliance, made two crucial mistakes. First, he hesitated. Instead of launching an all-out assault early, he believed he could starve the city into submission. But Vienna held longer than he expected. Second, he underestimated Europe's ability to unite. Word of Vienna's plight spread across the continent, and while Catholic and Protestant kings didn't often agree, the threat of Ottoman domination terrified them all. The Pope sent money. Venice and Tuscany pledged support. But the most important call was answered by one man, King Jan III Sobieski of Poland. Sobieski was a warrior king, brilliant, bold, and fiercely Catholic. He mobilized 30,000 troops, including the legendary Winged Hussars, Poland's elite cavalry. He joined forces with German, Austrian, and Bavarian contingents, creating a relief army of roughly 70,000 men. The Ottomans still outnumbered them, but they had one advantage left: surprise. The charge that saved Europe. On September 11, 1683, the Allied Christian army gathered silently in the wooded hills overlooking Vienna. Cloaked in fog and morning dew, nearly 70,000 soldiers from different nations prepared to do the unthinkable, to break the siege and turn the tide against an empire that had spread fear across continents for centuries. This coalition was diverse: German states, Bavarian allies, and most famously, the Polish army led by King Jan III Sobieski. And make no mistake, they weren't expected to win. The Ottoman forces below still numbered well over 100,000. Their artillery had pounded the city for 2 months. They had broken through parts of Vienna's walls, but they weren't ready for what was coming. Kara Mustafa, still arrogantly confident, assumed that Vienna would fall before any meaningful relief could arrive. Reports of the advancing coalition had reached him, but he delayed. He believed his army was strong enough to repel any Christian force, just as it had done countless times before. It was a fatal miscalculation. At dawn on September 12th, the Allied Christian army began its coordinated assault. On the left, Bavarian, Saxon, and Franconian troops launched a brutal attack against the Ottoman flanks. On the right, Austrians and Hungarian auxiliaries surged forward through ravines and hills. Their goal was to keep Ottoman forces distracted and pinned while the Polish army flanked from above. The terrain was unforgiving, steep, forested, narrow. Ottoman troops had fortified the ridges and choke points, but the defenders, exhausted from weeks of siege duty and confident in their positions, were unprepared for the ferocity of the assault. The fighting was hand-to-hand and vicious. The Janissaries, the Ottoman Empire's elite infantry, counterattacked with precision and discipline. But fatigue had dulled their edge. They had been engaged in siege operations for months. Their supply lines were stretched, and the morale inside their ranks was starting to fracture. Some troops had been looting the countryside instead of focusing on the front lines. By mid-afternoon, the Ottoman line was beginning to bend. Still, Kara Mustafa believed he could rally. He ordered reinforcements forward. Drums pounded. Arrows and musket balls filled the air. Ottoman cavalry swirled like a tide across the battlefield. But behind the hilltops, Jan Sobieski was waiting. The Polish king was not just a military man, he was a battlefield genius. He had spent days scouting the ridges and valleys surrounding Vienna. He understood the terrain, the timing, and most importantly, he understood his enemy. He had waited for the exact right moment. And when it came, he unleashed thunder. At approximately 5 p.m., over 3,000 Polish winged hussars descended from the Vienna hills. Mounted on armored war horses, clad in steel breastplates and adorned with massive wooden wings that creaked and roared as they charged, the hussars were both terrifying and majestic. Their wings weren't just for show. They were designed to rattle and howl, to spook enemy horses and create the sound of an unstoppable force. The ground shook. The sun glinted off thousands of lances. Behind them came German and Austrian cavalry, forming the largest known cavalry charge in recorded military history. They didn't just charge once. They charged again and again. Wave after wave slammed into the Ottoman lines. Imagine being in that moment. The thunder of hoofs, the metallic screech of armor, the cries of fury and fear. For the Ottomans, it was chaos. Their flanks collapsed. Confusion reigned. Kara Mustafa's troops, already weary and splintered, began to panic. Sobieski himself led the final charge. He wasn't in a command tent miles behind the front. He was in the thick of it, sword in hand, riding down the hill with his men. The Christian coalition broke through to the Ottoman command camp. Tents were set ablaze. Banners fell. What had begun as a siege now turned into a stampede. The Ottoman center disintegrated. Soldiers fled. Equipment was abandoned. And in the space of just a few hours, the entire Ottoman operation collapsed. What had seemed like an inevitable Ottoman victory became an overwhelming defeat. Inside Vienna, the defenders poured out of the gates. They saw their rescuers, not just fellow Europeans, but legends in the making, riding through the fields. They embraced them. Sobieski was hailed as a savior. Church bells rang and tears flowed. The city had held. Estimates suggest that Ottoman casualties were staggering, up to 20,000 killed or wounded in the battle and its chaotic aftermath. The Allied Christian army, by contrast, lost fewer than 5,000. The numbers alone don't tell the whole story, but they reveal just how complete the Christian victory was. But the consequences went deeper than any single battle. This was the first major defeat of the Ottomans in European heartland territory in over 2 centuries. The psychological blow was immense. It marked the end of the Ottoman advance into Central Europe. From here on, the empire would slowly recede. For Europe, the victory sparked a renewal of purpose. Alliances solidified, and the Allied Christian army launched a counteroffensive. Within a year, the Habsburgs began reclaiming Hungary. Vienna, which had nearly fallen, now became the spearhead of a European pushback that would last decades. And as for Kara Mustafa, he made the long journey back to Istanbul in disgrace. For his failure, Sultan Mehmed IV had only one punishment: death. On December 25, 1683, the Grand Vizier was executed by strangulation with a silken cord, a traditional method for noble executions in the Ottoman court. He had gambled everything and lost it all. But his legacy didn't die entirely. Across the centuries, the Siege of Vienna has lived on as a symbol, a clash of cultures, empires, and worldviews. It's been mythologized, politicized, and retold in countless forms. But at its heart is a truth. A city stood against the odds, a king answered a call, and a charge changed history. The Ottoman Empire would never again threaten Europe in the same way. The crescent moon had reached its furthest point, and then it began to wane. The turning point. Why it mattered. The victory at Vienna wasn't just a military triumph, it was a historical moment. The Ottoman Empire, once unstoppable, had reached its peak. From this moment on, it began a slow but steady decline. The failure at Vienna shattered the myth of Ottoman invincibility. Over the next 16 years, the Holy League, which was formed in 1684, pushed back, retaking Hungary and parts of the Balkans and pushing Ottoman forces farther south. The Treaty of Karlowitz in 1699 marked the first major territorial loss for the Ottomans, and it wouldn't be the last. Meanwhile, for Europe, the victory galvanized unity, at least temporarily. It reminded rival monarchs that even fractured kingdoms could come together when the stakes were existential. For Poland, Sobieski's charge became legend. He was hailed as the savior of Vienna, though internal politics would soon erode his legacy. For Austria, Vienna's defense marked the rise of the Habsburgs as a dominant force in Central Europe. But the siege also left lasting scars. Tens of thousands died. The cultural memory of the Ottoman threat lingered for centuries. And for the Ottomans, the defeat deepened internal struggles, sowed distrust, and signaled that reforms were badly needed, but would not come quickly. And there are smaller echoes too. Legend has it that Vienna bakers, inspired by the retreat, invented the croissant, its crescent shape mocking the Ottoman flag. Coffee, left behind by retreating Turks, became a Viennese staple. The aroma of war turned into the taste of peace. The Siege of Vienna wasn't just a clash of armies, it was a clash of eras. The medieval world was ending. The modern world, built on shifting alliances, cannon fire, and rising nationalism, was beginning. And Vienna had stood at the crossroads. 2 civilizations, 2 worldviews, met at the gates of a city. And though the cannons have long since gone silent, the echoes remain. It reminds us that history turns not just on kings and empires, but on choices, on courage, on the will to hold the line when everything seems lost. And sometimes, when the smoke clears, you find that a city has stood, and the world is just a little more free. How would you like to get a deeper understanding of history? impress your friends, and predict the future more accurately based on past events. If this sounds like something you might be into, then check out the brand new Captivating History Book Club by clicking the first link in the description. To learn more about the Ottoman Empire, check out our book, Ottoman Empire, a captivating guide to the rise and fall of the Ottoman Empire, the fall of Constantinople, and the life of Suleiman the Magnificent. It's available as an ebook, paperback, and audiobook. If you found the video captivating, please hit the like button and subscribe for more videos like this.